that Sinai takes place in a parsha, which you might be able to feel as if it's a little bit hidden from the public view, especially because the name of the parsha is Yisro. And why is the parsha named Yisro if it could just be named Aseres Adibros or Matan Torah? Or the truth is, you need it, or Sinai, because you need the name of the parsha to be in the parsha, so you don't have, you have to pick a word that belongs there, or that's found in the parsha. Matan Torah is not there, but there are other words you could choose. So the simple answer is that, look, we named the parsha after one of the first words, and the parshiot themselves are not necessarily something of religious significance, just like our chapters are not really part of the Jewish tradition. They emerged later on. The Jewish tradition has the Torah divided into paragraphs and sections with spaces and lines. That's the Masorah, as we call it, that we feel was been passed down from the time Moshe wrote the Torah to the time Ezra conveyed the Torah to the various codex scrolls that we have left. Right, that's the Masorah, that's the Torah, that's the way it's divided. Names of the parshios, maybe not so important. However, look, we're Jews. We'll take and investigate every single little detail that we can, all the way to its conclusion. So why is the parsha of Torah the parsha of Yisro? And there are a number of different answers that are suggested. Some look at Yisro as the kind of seeker that for truth that is a helpful exemplar for the Jewish nation. The Jews were coming from some spiritually humble origins after their stay in Egypt. They could have been coasting on their familial laurels. Here's Yisro, who's looking for the truth. Very famously, Yisro is the first person in history to say Baruch Hashem. It talks about Vayichad Yisro. Yisro is so overjoyed and enthusiastic about what God does. That type of enthusiasm is a pretty good model for the emerging Jewish nation to follow, that it's not about just sitting back and watching things transpire, but it's about being more proactive and emotional and exciting when it comes to our faith. So that might be one component. Another may be from the very first word of the parsha. Very first word of the parsha is Vayishma. Rabbi Leibla Eger, who is the grandson of Rabbi Akiva Eger. Rabbi Akiva Eger is a great Talmudist and halachic authority. And the worst thing possible to happen in a Jewish family happened to him. No, not intermarriage. His grandson became a Hasidic Rebbe. And so that was something that, this is at the height of the Hasidic, non-Hasidic divide, and Rabbi Akiva Eger's grandson became a Hasidic Rebbe, Rabbi Leibla Eger, author of the Torah's MS. And Rabbi Leibla Eger talks about that the key to Yisro's significance and importance in the Jewish nation's development, and the parsha containing the Torah begins with the words Vayishma Yisro, is that it's about the Shmi'ah. It's about Vayishma. It's about listening. Think about the way that Shema plays such a significant role in our religious declarations. And he goes on to discuss some of the things that we can appreciate about listening. Envision bending down to get a little closer to someone to hear what they have to say. There's something unique about listening and receiving those instructions that helps create a very lasting, meaningful relationship and connection. So Vayishma Yisro was about listening, and it was about listening and transforming that into the deepening of a connection. In Yisro's case, it was about what God did, and that excited him, and that led him on a journey. And that's a very good lesson that lays the foundation for the Jews receiving the Torah. Think about how we will invoke the words that officially are in next week's parsha, Na'aseh v'nishma. Right? In that respect, doing is more important than listening, but at the core, there has to be that initial shmiyah, that paying attention to the phenomena that is in front of us and responding. In many ways, the way he points out that the Torah is going to describe Moshe presenting God's offer of the Torah to the Jewish people. So within that presentation is the following message. First, it talks about seeing. Atem re'isem asher asisi l'Mitzrayim, v'asaschem al kanfei nisharim v'aviaschem elai. You saw already. You've had those visual experience, but now, in this, if you want to see it, it's in the Perek Yotes Pasuk Daled and Hey, 19:4-5. The Atta, and now in Shamoa tishmu b'koli u'shmartem es brisi v'yisem li skula mikol amim ki li karetz. And now, in Shamoa tishmu b'koli, if you'll listen. Sometimes when it's the doubling of the word im shamoa tishmu, very surely listen if you obey, and you'll observe my covenant, and you'll be a treasure nation to me. And it continues with the famous expression, you'll be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. This is what you should tell the Jewish people. In a way, Moshe is relaying to them God's message. You saw already, you're done seeing, now it's time to listen. And Rashi, commenting on what's going to happen with Shamoa, is that if you will Shamoa, if you will go undertake that listening that leads to internalization, Ye'erav lachem mikan ve'elach. It's going to get a lot easier for you. It's going to get a lot sweeter for you. He concludes quoting the Midrash, Shekol haschalos kashos. Right, this isn't easy to become this new commanded nation, but it all begins with being open to the listening. And in that respect, maybe Vayishma Yisro, Yisro's listening and being paying attention, and that prompting his journey and his excitement and his enthusiasm for the God of Israel is an appropriate way to tee up the Torah's presentation, the way that for the Jewish people getting the Torah. It very much is about the listening, whether it be about inclining our heads to listen to someone speak, whether it be to being open to listening to what God has to say. It is the koach hashmiya of hearing and understanding and accepting. Like Shema Yisrael just doesn't mean hear Israel. It's much more about listen intently, or appreciate, or accept, or internalize. And an extension of this may also be found in what Yitro did in that opening chapter of the parsha. Right, Yitro comes. Right, father-in-law. The in-laws are visiting. Here comes the father-in-law. I'm sure Moshe is thrilled, but as we all are when our in-laws visit. But Yitro actually has some good advice for Moshe, and there's this advice for Moshe to set up a system of assistance with CE at the end and assistance with NTS at the end, both types of assistance to help ensure that the different disputes, the legal disputes, the personal disputes of the Jewish people would be resolved properly. And he then suggests that Moshe shouldn't be the only one answering questions. There should be a whole system, kind of like you have the municipal court and the state court and the state Supreme Court and federal court and appeals court. That type of system gets in place. Different courts who are assigned to different communities and populations to hear the cases, until at the top of the ladder is where you get to Moshe. So got an email of Divrei Torah from Ramah students. They send out the email every Thursday night, and I always like to look just to make sure my kids aren't the ones giving it, because they wouldn't tell me if they're giving it. So I have to make sure that to keep up on what they do, I got to read everything. But sometimes I have the added benefit of seeing names that I recognize, students of mine in the past, or children of friends, so I can let them know if your kid gave the Divrei Torah. So this week, one of the Divrei Torah was by Rebecca Massel, senior Ramaz, and she addressed just this question from a number of different perspectives. What was so beneficial about this court system? Right? It may have made Moshe's life easier, but wouldn't it have taken away from the overall wouldn't have taken away a little from the overall the perception of the people being judged, right? Moshe used to be doing the judging, but now all of a sudden he's kicking the can down to some flunky who's going to do it at some lower level. And how does that play out? So there were a couple of different things that she spoke about, but one of the themes that emerged most that I took away from this concept is that, remember, if Moshe is dealing with it and he's dealing with everybody, he doesn't have a lot of time to give them, to pay attention to them, to listen to them. It's very much chick-chock, as they say. He'd have to deal with the case and pass it on, or decide to move to the next one. Having a mechanism of more people hearing the cases really creates more listeners. And in a sense, people feel heard. And that too is an element of the power of the word Vayishma. Yitro was someone who was Shomea. That made an impact on him. He acted upon that impact. He was a model for how we should listen, and then listen for what God is doing and to get excited about it. That sets the tone for the Torah, which is presented to the Jewish people as if you will listen, and that listening makes the Torah, makes the tradition that much sweeter, because we are more open, we're more receptive. We don't close ourselves off. We don't hear something and reject it. So there's that element of listening, and then it kind of I call that the vertical listening. But there's also the horizontal listening, the creating a landscape where there will be more of an opportunity for people to be heard. And people are heard when people are listening. And that it was something that emerged from the larger system of justice and adjudication that Yisro suggested that Moshe would set up in order to create a culture, a community of listeners, of listening. And I think that, very often, I speak about the fact that we have our vertical relationship with God in our religious lives, and then we have the more horizontal as we spread it out in connecting with other people. And the power of listening presents both of those paths for listening and being receptive to that which God is presenting before us and putting in front of us, and also listening to hearing out everything that might be said, might be coming in our direction. Obviously, listening to people who want our attention, who need our attention. The idea of being heard is a very powerful social value, and so we have a lot of important wisdom in this word Vayishma Yisro. Yisro was the great listener who presents an opportunity, a springboard for some lessons about how we too should become those great listeners, whether it be listening to the voice of God or hearing that which people around us are saying. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of talking involved because there needs to be talking and communicating for there to be listening. Think of a base medrash where there's a lot of noise, hard to hear, but everyone is listening to try and move forward. And maybe that could be the power, as we started, of that Rebbe Leibele Eger says, the power of Vayishma, the power of hearing. We are the chosen people. Once we were described as the never dying people. Maybe we are very much the listening people, in that it's that Vayishma, which is the prerequisite, which is that opening act that precedes our receiving the Torah in this week's parsha.